Welcome to the EX podcast, where I talk with business leaders, authors, and disruptors on how the workplace is changing. This podcast brings a different lens to the conversation around HR transformation, company culture, and employee engagement. It offers a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Why? Because companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they help to attract and retain talent. It is time we put people first to rehumanize the workplace. Simply because leaders who don't care about the employees will eventually be surrounded by people who don't care about their business. Today's guest is Lindsay Bousman, Senior Director of Talent Management at Expedia Group. Today with Lindsay we talk about how Expedia handles the implementation of the employee experience and what she has learned in the process. How Expedia works across functions and businesses on their EX initiatives. How the company leverages data to drive business decisions in the design and the implementation of EX. On cross-functional EX projects, who her team pulls in terms of expertise, background, and skill sets. And finally, how Lindsay is evolving her own HR experience at Expedia. Support for this podcast is brought to you by Life Guides. Responding to the inevitable and unexpected life challenges of your employees is one of the most profound opportunities to express your level of care, empathy, and compassion for the well-being of your people. The Life Guides network partners with organizations who recognize this profound opportunity and provides them with a platform to match the employees who are going through a specific life challenge with trained guides who have successfully navigated the same life challenge. Life Guides is a peer-to-peer network that exists to unlock and share the largest untapped and valuable resource on the planet, human wisdom and experience. Find out more at www.lifeguides.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Lindsay. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it will help promote the content. If you want me to speak at your next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at ex_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. I'm very excited for today's guest, Lindsay Bousman. Lindsay is calling from Bellevue in Washington, and she's the Senior Director of Talent Management at Expedia. Lindsay, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
What's your background and what led you to your current role at Expedia?
So my background and training is industrial organizational psychology. I have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, which is simply the study of people at work. And the way that we go about applying this in the workplace, in my role, is through the programs and practices that we create for our employees. So it's bringing the breadth and myriad of academic research to life in how we manage our employees, the programs and policies we create, and how we create an exceptional workplace. I got to Expedia through a series of choices in my career. The first one was to work for Microsoft Corporation in Redmond, Washington. I worked in a group there called the People Research Group. And our group there was really focused on, as we said, the people research and thinking through and studying employee engagement practices, the employee experience before we called it the employee experience, and creating research-based programs for our employees there. That led me to a similar role in Starbucks Corporation, where I worked in a group called Partner Insights. And in that group, we also studied the employees and the experience that they had, worked on creating our products, in fact, giving employee feedback on the products that Starbucks was putting out to their actual customers, assessing employees, manager development, and our employee experience. From there, I worked at a consulting firm called Paris Phoenix Group, locally here in Seattle, for several years. We worked with tech companies, with retail, and with nonprofits on creating customized talent management solutions. So that could range from a career path and career pathing program to studying the culture and the engagement of employees and creating programs and changes to culture to make it a better place to work. And we also did some data and people analytics to support those programs. From there, I really missed the internal employee experience and being able to impact things from the inside out. So I joined Expedia Group 4 years ago in this talent management role, starting and creating and building a function of consistent talent management practices across all of our brands and divisions.
Early on your careers, you mentioned you touched the employee experience, even though it was not labeled as it is today. How was it different then from what it is today?
I think it was different. So this was back in the early 2000s, and we were still really focused at that time on, there were a lot of talent wars at that time in the tech organizations, and things were really focused around benefits, around things that now we consider maybe hygiene factors, as it were, some things that are considered basics, a little bit around differentiators, but very much around the physical workplace and the drivers, what we call them, the drivers of employee engagement and satisfaction. So some things have stayed the same in terms of studying employees and looking at what makes a difference. But back then it was definitely more focused on some of the benefits and the physical environment, more so than it has been in the last several years.
How does Expedia handle the implementation of the employee experience? And in your 4 years with the organization, what have you learned?
One of our strategic imperatives at Expedia Group is to be the place where exceptional people who share a passion for technology and travel want to do their best work. And so we see the employee experience as a major part of how we deliver on that imperative. We've been on a journey over the last several years to infuse a mindset of designing the experience within our functional groups, such as human resources, or as we call ourselves, the people team, facilities, communications, and internal technology. And we've gone about this in a series of formal and informal ways. For example, 2 years ago, we invested in a rotating global summit for our entire HR organization to participate in an in-depth learning day of design thinking, which is a specific approach, as your listeners know, that can be used to create customer-centric, or in our case, employee-centric programs and experiences. We've been working then on democratizing that mindset and those skills, and we have deeper experts within our organization if a project needs it, and we need to go into things like journey mapping or developing personas. But we're really empowering every group within HR and every employee to think about the employee experience, to think about their end user and customer, and to make those moments and those interactions as good as they can be on an everyday basis.
How do you work across functions and business on your EX initiatives?
So more recently, we've been bringing together cross-functional groups and councils to create these working groups and integrated, coherent experiences throughout our global organization. For example, we have an Employee Experience Council, which includes representatives from our people team, facilities, communications, internal IT, and they look at very high impact and visible areas that are showing up in the employee experience. Their most recent focus area has definitely been our headquarters move. So we are moving from Bellevue, Washington towards downtown Seattle and on the coast of Puget Sound. And that move creates changes to an employee's experience, from their commute to their the lifestyle that they have, to the food options that we bring to the table on a daily basis. So we were in downtown Bellevue, and now we'll be moving to downtown Seattle. So that group has been working diligently, approaching this move in various ways to make sure that we're listening to employees, that we're creating a globally and inclusive headquarters that represents our employee base, that's accessible, that is globally friendly, from things like the food options that we'll have in our marketplace to an on-site gym and facilities, and getting user feedback at every step along the way. So we've had test groups and test sites, testing out all of the furniture options. We've had employees testing out the different workout equipment that we'll have in the gym. And we've been working with employees every step of the way to make sure that not only the building design, but the experience that we're trying to create reflects who we want to be. So that's one example, probably the biggest example that people will experience in joining the Expedia Group. We have other groups that also meet together, for example, our Learning Council, where we have our learning leaders that serve different parts of our internal audiences come together to think through and design what does the learner's experience at Expedia Group look like? How do we make it streamlined? How do we raise the bar and ensure that our learners are expecting a high level of service, that they're expecting the best content, and that they're getting an experience that truly helps them grow and develop, regardless of which group was the supplier for that learning experience.
Usually when you put together those councils, who takes the initiative to put together those councils, and usually, at least within Expedia, who leads those councils?
They're very much led by the group itself. So I think different councils have formed different ways. I had the opportunity to help form our Learning Leaders Council several years ago. Before we started calling them councils, we knew that there were several of us that were doing learning in different parts of the organization and recognized that we had some crossover, we had some opportunities to share and grow from each other. And so in that particular case, it was very grassroots, and several of us as learning leaders said, let's get together, let's start with a summit and see who knows who and who's serving which audiences, and how could we do this better? How could we help each other? So that one was very grassroots and organic. Our Employee Experience Council was a little more formalized, where I think each member of that council had different one-on-ones with each other throughout the course of probably several months, and realized we're all talking to each other about the same things. Let's come together. So I think in that particular council, they trade off responsibilities of ownership amongst each other. It's very egalitarian in that way. In the Learning Leaders Council, it has rested with my team for a while because we have been the team that served all employees, whereas other learning groups served subsets of employees based on role or function or geography. Going forward, I think we're experiencing a change in our learning organization, and we'll have a little more formality over that. We will have someone actually looking at governance and infrastructure, and they will probably run that group from an administrative perspective for us. But mostly it's been grassroots, knowing that coming together and collaborating is easier when we all do it together.
We talked about pulling together different groups or different departments on EX initiatives. And who do you pull in terms of expertise and background and skill set to have not only diversity, but also the right people in place to bring it forward?
I think it depends. So we have a concept called customer advisory boards. And in the people team, we use our customer advisory boards to be an ongoing sounding board to help us co-create a product or service. And so those customer advisory boards, we strive to have representatives from all parts, major parts of our businesses, from geography, because sometimes we see regional differences or cultural differences we want to appreciate and include. So with those, we really take a look at, do we have representation across and throughout the business to make sure that we're hearing all those voices. On something like a specific project such as the headquarters move, typically there's a person who's on point for something like that within those projects. And that person is invited to the table. We're a very inclusive and collaborative organization, so it's not uncommon for a meeting invitation to say, if you're not the right person for this, please be sure to bring someone on your team, and we can connect and make sure the right person is there. So it tends to be very open and transparent of an organization. And so if the wrong person is there, or the work has shifted, or the purpose is starting to shift, perhaps get more tactical and operational than it started out to be, we're just really flexible with revisiting, are the right people in the room, and being open to including those as the purpose of a group or a project or an initiative starts to shift.
And employee experience design and implementation it's very much an iterative process. And you could think that the larger the company is, the less flexible and the more complex it becomes. And you've been part of large organizations in your career. How flexible and adaptable Expedia has been across those different EX initiatives?
I think we've been really flexible. We have an internal culture of what we call test and learn. Mm-hmm. And so this starts in our business where we test different things, even on our websites or with our customers. And so it's not uncommon to hear people talk about an A/B test or a prototype. We are very open and acknowledge incremental steps, and incremental changes are important to how we do business. And so that tends to feed into across just how we run our business and things like an employee experience initiative. And so there is a lot of flexibility and just agility in the way that we design things. We end projects looking back at what could be different, what do we do different next time? And it's just a part of the habits that we create to make sure that we are evolving and growing and changing along with the needs around us. So I can only imagine and know some of the changes that have been happening with things like our headquarters move, and where we might have started out the project with one assumption of how something would work. Mm-hmm. And as we move forward, we just see that that's starting to cause friction, or it doesn't actually work that way in practice. And so we have to adjust. So that adjusting has just been part of our culture. We have a guiding principle called relentlessly strive for better, and that's enacted in all that we do. So the concept of how could this be better? How could this be different? People expect change, and then therefore they expect it to be an incremental improvement.
From your experience, what advice would you give to some of our HR listeners who may work in a more conventional industry, not necessarily very knowledgeable of the agile process and iterative process that you see a lot in tech companies?
Yeah, I think people can get caught up in some of the specifics around agile. When you do agile software development, it's rapid and prototyping, and you change things very fast versus a waterfall process that might have a very defined beginning and an end state. We apply kind of an agile mindset across what we do because we're a software company, but also because we've grown so rapidly and we see the need to change or things will break. And so for us, it's become an organic change that's been easier to do. I think one way to think about it is in terms of pilot testing or small testing. So in industries or businesses that might be different than that, it's seeing if you can identify a group of employees or a group of the business who is willing and ready to try something different for a while. You might run a parallel process to see if it works. You might get employees into a room and get some feedback or a focus group, or build a mock-up or a prototype just to test something out to get reactions. So when we start to do things that are honestly made from pipe cleaners and duct tape and using a design thinking approach, and you create a mock-up and a prototype, there's low risk. And people understand that you're not investing a lot of money, you're not breaking anything, you're being creative and trying something new. So when you start small and you start with some things that are perhaps not as controversial or not as hard to change, I think it opens the door for people to broaden their mindset and start to play with what are the ways we could do something different.
So you've been studying human behaviors in the workplace for quite some time. Have they really changed over the past, let's say, 15 years or early 2000s from where they are now? Or is it just there's more emphasis and focus today than there was 15 years ago, but really the aspirations, motivations, and needs of the employees haven't really evolved?
Yeah, I think at the core, human behavior and motivation changes slowly. What I think has changed over the course of the last 15 or 20 years is the way that we rapidly recognize the importance and the impact that an organization and the culture has on a human's well-being and on their life. Certainly the wars for talent in the tech industry have made that just rapidly much more important for us to recognize. When you lose talent to other places, you have to understand why. When other companies get to an innovation or something faster than you or better than you, or they have higher sales, you want to know why. And so in an information technology world that I've worked in for a long time, it comes back to the people. The people are inventing those innovations, and the people are choosing to come or to stay. And so the motivations and the human behavior themselves hasn't changed as much. I think it's the recognition of the impact and the shift in power, really, honestly, to employees, to be able to say as a collective or as one voice, this is what we need, or this is what we want, or this is what will help me deliver my best work to you as an organization. And what organizations have done is start to recognize that and to hear that data and to listen to that voice collectively and know that the business problem they have gets solved by people, and those people are telling them something important that they need to do their best work. So organizations themselves have started to listen more, but I think the human motivation has been there.
For those who are listening to us and are maybe in more conventional HR roles, what would be your advice to learn and to train on EX and human behaviors and agility and iterations so that they can embrace the new concept of the employee experience and not just the HR traditional type of role?
I have a couple suggestions. I think listening to a podcast like this and listening to different voices is a great start.
Yes.
I think it's a great start because I don't think there's one right way.
Right.
There are things that work better. There are things that are more accepted in one organization over another. And so the trick is to find out what the accepted practices are that you can change. What are the openings that you can start to think through doing things differently? Figuring out who internally are your sponsors or your allies or people that share that desire and that mindset. To learn about it, the information right now that's available for free from books, from podcasts, from YouTube videos around things like design thinking are immense. And I think going into it with a mindset of there isn't one right way. There is a collection of tools and practices and techniques that you can employ in different situations to help gather data, to help listen to the customer experience and develop empathy, to turn those into practices that you can use and co-create with people internally. I think it's the ability to collect those tools and techniques and then to use them in small ways to make change that then becomes accepted, gets a couple wins, and allows you to move forward on to bigger and better things. So the world of what you can learn about design thinking or employee experience is large. I think there are conferences, there are summits, there are ways to go and hear from people and take the nuggets that you think will work for you in the situation that you're in. Starting small has gotten us a lot of places in the world and in the world of employee experience. So finding that window, finding that niche, and making sure that you have a few partners and allies to help you work it through is the best way to start.
It's never a lonely journey. It has to be collaborative and iterative along the way too. How do you leverage data to drive business decisions in the design and the implementation of the employee experience?
Yeah, so I've been in the world of employee research and data analytics for most of my career. So the use of data to me is not new or novel. It's a way in which we're using it to drive the employee experience beyond some of our traditional outcomes. So at Expedia Group, we have our employee survey is called Rate Your Stay. So a nod to our travel industry and our hotel and travel partners.
Nice.
We use our Rate Your Stay survey results to impact across the business. So we definitely use it in how we think about making managers champions of the employee experience that they're creating together with their employees. So we put that data in the hands of our managers and, interestingly, our employees as well. So in traditional employee surveys, typically you would release results to the managers or to the leadership. We take an extra step, and that is several weeks after results are available to managers, we publish them and make them transparent to every team member on that team. So we include them and empower them to co-create the employee experience that they want together as a team versus making it in the hands of the manager. So we democratize data internally so people can make choices and think through what are the most important things on my team that will change my employee experience that I can control. From an organization perspective, we take that data and we look at it to say, are benefits on par that they need to be? Mm-hmm. Are we getting leverage on our inclusion initiatives to the extent that we want them? So we cut that data and we look at it in very different ways. And then we follow up. Most of the products and practices that we have, we go back to our employees and customers and collect data. So we have a monthly, for example, pulse that we've been doing as we prepare for this upcoming headquarters move that allows us to get feedback about what's on the minds of employees, what can we change. Some of it is communication, what myths are existing that we need to correct and change. And sometimes it's really listening and saying, yeah, that those commute options aren't going to work. Or how can we make sure that we're inclusive in the food options? How can we make sure that the building is accessible to people with different ability levels? So the data collection as a practice is something that we believe in, but then it's also the follow-up and use.
I was about actually to ask you the frequency of those surveys. So it sounds like it's every month. What's the turnaround from collecting the data to getting the data back to the managers?
Yeah, so our Rate Your Stay survey is currently our census survey, and that happens every year. So that is an annual event, and managers get results usually in 2 weeks after the survey closes. We spend a little time coming up with what we're seeing at the company and what our trends are, because we want to include that story in the manager results as well. So we spend about 2 weeks on the back end on my team looking at those results, meeting with our senior executives and talking through the company action plan before we release results. On some of our other agile listening strategies, such as our pulse survey, that monthly pulse survey is very targeted to the Seattle move and what we're finding in that. We have a monthly pulse survey related just to our culture and our culture transformation and business transformation. And for those results are available to a specific set of leaders in the population instantaneously. So we don't do as much back-end analysis on those as we're doing a monthly tracking of those results for the last year. So those results are instantaneous. Our broader census survey results, we take a little longer to dig into those before we release them.
On a more personal note, how have you evolved your own HR experience throughout the years?
So I think for me, it's dependent on where I've been at the time. What are the business imperatives, and how can we evolve as an HR organization in a way that supports those business imperatives? At Expedia Group, we've saw ourselves as an opportunity to test out our work on ourselves first and become early adopters. So we consider this, some companies think about this as eating your own dog food or drinking your own Kool-Aid or things like that. We like to call it drinking our own champagne and thinking about it as a celebration, as a moment. We've gotten something ready to test and a product that's ready to test it, and we should celebrate it and test it out ourselves. And so we have an HR champagne launch, and we test that product or that experience on ourselves first. Sometimes it's small scale, sometimes it's bigger scale, but that is one way that we've had success in thinking about the employee experience at Expedia, is thinking about ourselves as employees. And if we don't like something or we won't use it, we can't expect our friends and our business partners in our business side to want to do that either. So it's a small mindset change, but it has really helped and think about, let's get to a point where we have something to celebrate and test and then release it to the business.
Now, before we conclude our conversation today, let me ask you some fun questions. Now that you work at Expedia, I've got to ask you this question first, is what is your favorite vacation spot?
I have two kinds of vacations that I like to take. I like to take city vacations where we're going and exploring something typically historical or architecture or something of that nature. My favorite city to do that in is London. And the other kind of vacation I really love is a beach vacation. And my favorite beach destination is a little place called Isle of Palms in South Carolina.
What is your biggest screw up at work, and what did you learn from it?
I think failures happen more often than we probably want to admit. We had a bit of a data issue historically in one of the groups that I was in, where we took a great amount of time to have attention to detail on our data, and it's very important. We had a concept called second set of eyes, where anything that went out of our team needed two people to be looking at it and checking it. And we'd gone over that, and we had a significant degree of attention on that. But we did have a set of survey results go to our CEO, that had some issues, some data errors. a transposed number or something like that. And it came back to our team, and it turned out, of course, to be a human error. And they were very gracious about it, but it certainly reiterated that the story would have been a lot different had that data error been true. And it just reiterated even more the extra care and attention that numbers tell stories and numbers have legs. And when those numbers are wrong, people reach different conclusions. So that was, it seems minor, but when you're giving data to your CEO about the state of your employee experience, it's important that you probably triple check those numbers and not double check. Thankfully, our CEO was gracious enough to say, "Oh, this doesn't look right. Can someone take a second look and make sure that this is true? Because if it is, then we have a different story." So it's certainly a learning and a moment that happens and is human. And our team's reaction to it was, the ability to fix it and correct it and move on.
What could we spot you doing outside of work that would flabbergast your coworkers?
I've done a couple things outside of work that some of my coworkers know. So I did spend, just a little bit ago, I spent 3 years doing competitive ballroom dancing. So that sometimes flabbergasts people, but I love dancing. I love a good competition. So the combination of those two things together has been something that I very much enjoyed.
That's really cool. What is your favorite word?
It's more of a phrase. It depends.
What is your least favorite word or phrase?
It's always been done that way.
Okay, what sound or noise do you love?
Water on a beach.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Doors slamming.
What is the way for our listeners to follow you and Expedia on social media and see what's going on in the EX space within the organization?
So I'm on LinkedIn as Lindsay Bousman, and Expedia Group is as well. We have a social channel, Life at Expedia Group, that is on many social channels that exist. So Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, hashtag Life at Expedia Group, as well as our own site, Life at Expedia Group. We have many brands under the Expedia Group name, from Hotels.com to Vrbo to HomeAway to Hotwire and Orbitz. And so Life at Expedia Group is how those brands come together to show our employee experience.
All right, and we'll share those on the podcast notes as well. Any last word of wisdom or advice for our listeners?
The employee experience starts with you. The ability that you have to create a great place to work starts with every individual, and the team and the culture that you come to work and to create together.
That's a very nice way to conclude our conversation today. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.